Hello, Dawn. Thank you, and welcome to our virtual studio visits with the Mennello Museum of American Art. How are you today?
I am great. I'm so happy to see you, and I'm so thankful to you for asking me to do this. I love having conversations with you, so thank you. Yeah.
Same. It's really great to be in the studio with you again, even though it's virtual.
Yeah, we do what we can.
Exactly. But you can still see the progress and everything that's going on behind you, and your thought forms as they're coming out.
Yeah, it's kind of fun because I was just thinking this morning how you came over for a studio visit, and because of the pandemic, I can't really keep track of time anymore, but it was well over a year ago, right?
Yeah.
And I was in the midst of kind of sorting out this project that has since been realized, Wretched subtitle. And I was also in a slightly different studio just a couple of blocks away. So it's interesting to be sort of transitioning into a new space, which always takes some getting used to, and being at a very different place with this project. So it's fun to get to kind of revisit it with you.
That's amazing. And you also have a studio space in North Carolina?
I do, yeah. So I basically divide my time between here in Winter Park and Asheville, North Carolina. So I teach at Rollins, for those of you that don't know, which I guess no one does because we're just now saying it. But yes, and that's really, I'm fortunate that a lot of my work is in digital form, so I can kind of take large hard drives back and forth, and then I will end up kind of driving certain materials back and forth. But yeah, it's somewhat unique, but not entirely. I'm certainly not the only artist that has more than one studio space that I work in, but yeah, I'm fortunate.
Sure. And it's a lot of fun. I imagine going to the different spaces, especially for the environments that are in your work, which if you would you like to go ahead and just describe your practice briefly for the viewers?
Yeah, I mean, over the last, well, let's see, there's kind of like segments of it. So starting around 2008, 2009, I started really working with both the still and moving image very deliberately together to kind of think about these different modes of time and representation, and just the way that those two forms are in conversation with one another. So it'd be the same kind of imagery in both a still and moving form. And then while I started working in that way, I also interestingly never thought I would work in landscape per se, but sort of started becoming really intrigued by the landscape as a certain kind of perceptual space. So really started most of my work around from 2010, almost all of it, aside from a couple of discrete projects, has been working with the natural world in some form or another. So not necessarily in kind of a documentary way, although there is, I do work within traditions of documentary because that's one of the things I'm interested in kind of probing. But so in the last, since 2010 onward, I've been kind of seeking out spaces or kind of finding them, and sort of researching aspects of particular areas and doing a lot of site responsive work. So I sort of work in spaces, and I have a set an idea about the way I'm going to approach things, but it is really dictated by how I respond to a set of conditions once I'm in a place. And then I start kind of generating material and kind of working with it there on site, and then additionally in my studio space. So that's a weird way to describe my practice, but
but it's amazing. And of course, for those watching, film-based, digital-based photography, and many different ways, the image, like you said, probing the notions of landscape, of archives, of documentation. And that's what I really find stunning about your work, is those the kind of like dualities of, it's technically, yes, a documentation, but it's not specific as what everyone else would say, like the traditional landscape. It's minute, it's detailed, and then there's this beautiful infusion I feel like that you give to your work.
Oh, thank you. That's so nice to hear you kind of articulate it that way. And it's funny because I was also, I run and I swim, and I'm constantly like always thinking about all these things that meander through my mind. So during this morning's swim, I was just kind of going back and forth in my mind with these two words, image and record, because I was anticipating our conversation. And my primary thing that I'm always interested in getting back to is just kind of photography. I don't even know what the best term is. Like lens-based media is a term that's used, that I use sometimes, but sometimes it's not even about the lens. It's about the form of light registering on material and recording something and producing an image. So I was thinking about, and I think about this a lot, just like taking words apart and really considering, what does it mean to image something in relation to what is an image, and what does it mean to record, and in relation to what is a record. So you mentioned sort of archiving things. So it's just, I'm very interested in how photographs and sort of film and video operate as particular kinds of representations, and beyond what they depict, but just how they are as modes is, it's endlessly fascinating, because it's basically how we understand our world is through images in this way, and more often in a contemporary space through some sort of photo-based image. It's perplexing, kind of.
It is. Well, and the whole physical action of viewing involves bringing the light into your eyes as well, and being able to figure it's very much a photographic process there too. And I just like the instance of, we've talked multiple times about how your work certainly continues like a photographic legacy and looks at that and builds upon it. But, when you said light hitting material, I immediately thought about the Impressionists as well, and how important that was.
Yeah, for sure. And I love that you just, referenced our own sight and our vision. And so, literally our eyeballs, right? Our lenses. So, I mean, and for sure, that's absolutely, one of the things that I think about a lot too, is certain kinds of painterly aesthetics, right? So that's a component of it too. There's always these sort of layers around not only the nature of what it is that's being depicted, how it's depicted, but aesthetics is part of it, right? And so that's that is a thing. These notions of beauty are always tricky, because as artists, many of us are very enthralled with beauty, but it's a lot of work can kind of just fall flat if that's where it ends. It's like, oh, that's beautiful. Although at the same time, there can be really amazing, beautiful things, and that's amazing. But I mean, I guess part of what I, as someone that works with photographs too, it's tricky, because and as someone that teaches photography also, I don't begrudge anyone for wanting to make wonderful, fun, amazing photographs. I think it's great. But I also think it's worth considering more deeply how photographs function and what we can do with certain kinds of aesthetics in relation to poetics and beauty with those kinds of images. So
yeah, really breaking into the philosophy of the aesthetics.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I'm quite traditional in a lot of ways, believe it or not. I don't know. I mean, I think that, and one of my undergrad professors always kind of reminds me of this, is the importance of poetics and the importance of poetry and the relationship between photography and poetry. And, that kind of connects with my interest in Virginia Woolf, that I work with a lot in terms of responding to some of her writings, and just this kind of notion of fragmentation and what's conjured through language and image. And that's, poetics is imaging. So
I can definitely see that too, in the breaking apart of your pieces behind you as well. Do you want to talk about Wretched You a little bit, and the works that you're working on behind you?
Yeah, so speaking of Virginia Woolf, there's no way for me to nutshell this, but I will super try. So that the project Wretched is an extension of a longer form project called Conditions for an Unfinished Work of Mourning. And Wretched U came from, I was working on a project with Virginia Woolf's novel, The Waves, and she mentions the yew tree repeatedly in a couple of really profound ways, and I wasn't familiar with that tree. I've mentioned before that they're prominent in the UK, a particular species of yew. But so at any rate, I got really fixated on doing a little bit of research into this species and understanding that it's known as a symbol of death and regeneration. And then found out that a different species of yew exists in the forests of the Pacific Northwest, in Oregon, where I had lived for 10 years in the 90s. And so I was thinking about, well, I want to go out there and kind of think about this yew tree in relation to that history and that landscape. And there's another kind of component of it that's pretty intriguing that I learned as well, that the species was almost entirely decimated in the 90s when its bark contains a compound that's used in chemotherapy drugs. So fortunately, though, the tree that's one of the things that fascinates me about it, is it's has this ability to regenerate really quite, not rapidly, quite slowly, but it's very hard to kill this thing. So at any rate, there's a lot of layers to how I was kind of wanting to think about this particular tree, but I went out on a couple of different occasions for about a month-long period each and connected with some people in some different forest spaces and found out about a particular grouping of trees, some of which are very old growth. And so I made a lot of records on site of the trees by putting sort of sensitized paper throughout the tree, sensitized cyanotype paper, and also just silver gelatin paper that's also just exposed by light and sun. So, and well, this is like kind of a long story, because part of this also has to do with like this kind of DIY approach. It's like, what can I do? I'm not going to have a darkroom up there. I really just want the most basic imprint. And so, it's a lot of explorations, and one thing led to another, and this became like an appropriate method and mode, I guess. So that there are kind of three components. There's a video component that has a soundtrack that was produced by a group of friends of mine in Portland. There's the sort of visual two-dimensional component of the works produced on site, and then works produced with material brought back to the studio, and then reconfigured sort of documentation images. And then sorry, I didn't get you a copy of this book yet, but there's the book, which is here. So the book includes excerpts of the research and an essay written by my friend and collaborator, Lisa Zayer. So there's a whole bunch of components to it. And I had the debut exhibition of the work at Tracy Morgan Gallery in Asheville in October. And right now I'm trying to reconfigure some components, which is what's behind me, to try and figure out how it will be installed in our upcoming faculty biennial at the Cornell Fine Arts Museum. So that was a really probably meandering response.
No, it got to every piece of it. There were extra questions in there too that I would have been asking anyway. The book that you created, the book for the exhibition, that's available through your gallery, right, Tracy Morgan?
Yes, it is.
Oh, good.
And I'll have a viewing copy at CFAM. And there's also, you can see the whole book on my website. If you go to the Wretched U page, there's a digital version. And I'm always happy to make things available to people that can't access them or can't purchase them. I was thinking about this today too. I always put all of my full-length videos online so that people can see them. I understand the rationale for not doing that sometimes in relation to, if they are part of a collection or something of this nature. But I do think it's really important that people are able to see. I'm teaching a video art class right now, is one thing that, students, we can see excerpts a lot, and that gives us sort of an understanding. but video and film are so much about duration, and like, so the whole kind of package is important, and the video
concert, orchestra.
yeah. So I like, to me, the video component really echoes the book. So I made the book after all the component pieces were done, and it sort of follows a similar kind of arc as the video in terms of what content is introduced and what sort of the emotional tone is, I guess. But yeah, so, yes, the book is available through Tracy Morgan Gallery.
Good. Perfect. So you just said also that your exhibition opened in October. So how has the new realities of COVID or social upheaval, how have those been affecting your practice?
Yeah, when we chatted the other day, I said, you know, it was a little bit sad for me to have, you know, to open this show during that time, but really just a little, because I do feel like it was a generative time also to have the months leading up to the exhibition to sit with this work in a different way than I might have otherwise. I mean, certainly things were circulating through my mind that were different than would have been otherwise. But also, as I was telling you, so like those are actually just digitized scans of that. But that actually, both of those sequential pieces I made in the probably month before the show opened, and maybe would not have otherwise if I wasn't so home in the studio for such a prolonged period, and really thinking and rethinking things and grabbing the sort of containers of material and deciding to scan things in particular ways and discovering stuff that I hadn't even occurred to me, that became a really important kind of final component to the works. So yeah, like I think other artists that I've talked to feel similarly. There's a generative time for a different sort of reflection and engagement, but yes, positive spin always.
Yes, always. But it's good because it's good to also note too that, of course, you know, these spaces are still open and you can get out and see artwork now and be safe and check it out.
Yeah, and for sure. And when the faculty show opens, which will be April 9th, yeah, I'm trying to remember if CFAM has made any, I can't remember what the max capacity is. What is it at the Mennello?
Our max, we have, we do it different by hour, but it's about 25
okay.
at a time.
But yeah, you can get a free ticket online for CFAM and just sort of sign up for a time and go. This is a little bit exciting for me in that for the Tracy Morgan show with this work, I deliberately had the video on a freestanding wall in the middle of the gallery, and I had built a special, I did not build it. I cannot build things. I had a special screen built for the video, and it was, in the midst of everything with the sort of speakers there. And in this instance, I'm excited to try it out differently, and the video will be in the black box video space, a room made specifically for video. So it will have a different kind of presence where you can kind of sit with it in the space singularly, and then the sort of 2D works will be adjacent on the walls as you kind of make your way in. So I'm hoping lots of people will get to go and sit down and watch it. It's like 10 minutes long about.
Yeah, it sounds like it would be a really nice and like thoughtful space to go into to look at all the layers that you're looking at. From seeing your work in the past, you can see all the layers build upon themselves throughout the movies, and it's very lyrical too.
Yeah, thank you for saying that. I mean, that's an important aspect to. I mean, all of my projects have been sort of built around that sort of lyricism. It's a good word. Yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, is there anything else that you would like to bring up, chat about? Anything else that's going on in your practice?
Yeah, well, I'm about to take a year-long sabbatical, which I'm very excited about. And of course, the COVID situation has thrown a hitch in planning. But ideally, I will be visiting some particular spaces and embarking on what I'm currently envisioning as sort of the third installment of the Conditions for an Unfinished Work of Mourning project, tentatively titled Descent. And as we chatted the other day, it's kind of still in its forming phases, but it's the thought right now is to connect with certain kinds of bodies of water in relation to this kind of set of ideas around spaces that have a certain kind of residue of heaviness. And so I'm going to start in my hometown of Sault Ste. Marie, Michigan, just as a means of reconnecting with Lake Superior and the St. Mary's River there. And there's just a lot of embedded stuff kind of there. So I'm gonna start there and just kind of see where, I don't know, like it's hard to say right now because it's kind of in the formation stages, but I'm still trying to find some residencies in some other locations, and I have invitations from some colleagues in different institutions. So hoping to go to Colombia, South America, back to Australia where I've done work before, definitely back to the Pacific Northwest and Michigan, and we'll see where else. If people have suggestions, let me know.
And another thing I wanted to bring up too, all these spaces and the environment that you work in, you're very responsible and sustainable with how you're collecting, and you make sure you're working with the right people to do so.
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up too, because one of the things, so the kind of yellowish piece that you can see behind me was produced because I made a little toning solution out of the tannic acid that I obtained from pulverizing the bark from the yew tree that I obtained sustainably, because it's true, you can't just go into forest spaces and peel and pick whatever you want, contrary to possibly popular belief. And so I did make a point to connect with the US Department of Agriculture, who put me in touch with a sustainable forest called Hyla Woods outside of Portland. And yeah, and then when you're making these kinds of connections, that's just another aspect of research, because I, was taken through Hyla Woods by Peter, totally spacing Peter's last name right now, but the owner of the company in the forest. And he, had all this really amazing information that he was sharing with me as we took our walk through these really thick forest spaces. So yeah, and that's why I also love connecting with either residencies or working with universities, because then the people locally have connections with any number of people I wouldn't even have considered or been able to make contacts with. And that's where things really generate. And, one approach that I might have had when I arrived might shift drastically because of something I learned or a conversation that I had. Yeah.
That I love that about art is the research and then the experience and then learning more from it and just continuously building upon it.
Me too. I mean, that's what keeps me going for sure, is I always know there'll be something else I learn or find out, and that will make me want to do whatever the next thing will be. And that's just always how it's been. I don't really conceive of sort of a grand kind of plan project. I see where sort of ideas and interests take me. And, there's always been an overarching sort of set of ideas that my work tends to connect with, that tend to have to do with loss and longing and this kind of poetics that we talked about. But yeah, I mean, the world is full of options for these kinds of things.
And I'm very happy and amazed to see your work and to see it continue all of those layers of personal history, of the landscape, of pieces of the landscape, of the science even of it, and just the aesthetics of how you present it as well in your various media. So thank you for your work. I really enjoy it.
Oh, thank you so much. Thanks for chatting. And I look forward to the next part of this thing on the Facebook.
Yeah, me too. Okay. Facebook Live, here we come.